Jeff Moody here. Thank heavens. I know you were wondering where I was, but Jeff Moody, Jeff Moody MD, jeffmoodymd.com, jeffmoody.com, Facebook. Start a watch party today. That'll be awesome to get other people. Share this with your friends. You can go to Amazon and get a copy of my book. Woohoo! It just came out. The Doctor's Burned Out, A Physician's Guide to Recovery. You can I have a course on my website that it's Burnout Recovery for You. It's kind of a turbocharged way to get some really individualized steps to get your burnout handled and recovered. Just, get the help you need. That's the bottom line always for us, for me, is whoever can help you. If it's us, great. If it's Kevin, who's my awesome guest today, great. But just get the help you need. And today I am so lucky and happy and fortunate to have not only a colleague, but a friend as my guest. Kevin Crumpton, MD, is an emergency room physician here in Colorado Springs. He's been doing it for about the same amount of time that I've been doing it. So we both have a little bit of gray hair and experience, and I think that's useful. He went to Vanderbilt for medical school, which is a terrific medical school. He did his emergency room training at Denver Health, which I think is one of the top 5 programs in the country. And we're lucky enough to have him here. And I'm lucky enough to have him call me at 2:00 in the morning when he needs to talk to me when I'm on call. So Kevin Crumpton, thanks so much for being on the live stream today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me, Jeff.
Well, the main reason why I wanted, since this is about burnout breakthrough and burnout recovery and all things burnout to physicians, the main thing I wanted to chat with Kevin about today is I feel like if there's anyone, any specialty, any physician that is probably like from day one, from minute one in your training and in your work, and once you're finished with your residency, who is at risk for burnout, it would be emergency room physicians, because it's high intensity, variable, sometimes nighttime, sometimes daytime, really potentially traumatic, maybe even PTSD inducing work. And I was very curious, kind of how Kevin is it like kind of my Zen master of Quan. He is like, he's always very centered and very calm. And I really appreciate it when he's calling me, because it calms me down. So I kind of really wanted to pick his brain and see what he could tell us about what he does personally, and then maybe what they do organizationally from a group standpoint, and then maybe even nationally for burnout. So I guess, first of all, tell me what you feel like you do from a personal standpoint to help mitigate some of the things with burnout.
I think from a personal standpoint, there are a couple of key factors that are involved. And one is to make sure that my sleep schedule stays as normal as possible in the midst of all of the changing shifts that we do. We work all over the clock. All of us still do overnight shifts as well. And so that's I noticed that when my sleep is off and altered by my shifts, that I tend to feel worse and feel more stressed and feel more burned out. That's a key component for me, for sure. I think it is for most of us. And not all of us are blessed with the ability to close your eyes and immediately be able to take a nap at any time. And that's certainly me. After a couple of night shifts, my sleep is off for a couple more days, for sure.
Yeah.
I think exercise for me is incredibly important. And I know that I feel personally, when I haven't exercised for a few days, the feeling of the need to do so. I think my body is conditioned to need and to do that. And I know that has a lot of underlying neurochemical reasons why that's not only good for me physically, but good for me in handling stress and dealing with stress and feeling healthy ongoing. So
you really attack it first, not from maybe a structural standpoint or emotional standpoint, but more for like physical, like let's take care of the temple. And if the temple is good, then I can actually go do the things that my work is requiring me to.
Absolutely. I think you need to make sure that you're eating properly. A lot of us realize, especially on longer shifts and on night shifts, just as an example, if you eat a large carbohydrate meal, to start off with, I mean, you're already sleepy to start to, you're going to be sleepy anyway, not just contribute. So just as a matter of also what you eat as well. And then kind of this kind of fits between your personal and just professional, the way you think about burnout is the amount that you actually work is absolutely crucial. And I'm fortunate enough to be in an emergency medicine group that has many long-term members who joined the group first and have stayed with the group. And the philosophy has always been to maintain a path that will let you practice long-term and not get burned out. And the single most important factor for that is how much you're working.
Yeah, absolutely.
Could I make 1/3 more dollars if I worked 1/3 more shifts? Yes, I could. And that clearly would lead to my career doing that. And
yeah,
so
exactly.
I think I got lucky to realize that early on. I maybe I had a couple of older colleagues who mentioned as much and took it to heart. And it's also just kind of the way that I'm personally wired. I'm not striving to make multiple millions of dollars a year in this career. And so that's not my first focus anyway.
Well, and I think you hit it right. It's like if you really want this to be a long-term game, then you really have to kind of like it's more kind of a marathon than a sprint, so to speak. And yeah, you could work 20 shifts a month, and I'm sure you'd be good for about 2 months, and then like the wheels would come off the wagon. So,
yeah, that's right. That's right.
What do you feel like there's maybe that link again between like kind of your personal set point, maybe financially or ego wise or whatever, and then if you can I think you told me right before you came on, one of your older colleagues kind of gave you some good advice about like how much to work and how much to think about your expenses. I thought that was a great point.
Something to the effect of make sure that your expenses are below the amount of money that you're working and gaining month on end, so that you have the opportunity to adjust downward if you feel like personally that you need to for whatever reason, right, and not be struggling to have to work a full maximum amount every month to pay your expenses. That just automatically leads to stress. And obviously there are a lot of things that we're not in control of as physicians very well, coming out of school with large amounts of debt and starting new families and actually beginning to not be poor anymore, as many of us are going through medical school and residency. And so there are a lot of other forces at play to push that financial clock higher and higher. But I think if you take a step back and very consciously plan what your financial needs are going to be and not try to shoot for the
maxed out. Yeah.
Then you're going to be happier, especially in the long term.
Yeah. I thought, one thing we also talked about is that I feel like you were very fortunate and also you were very intelligent when we were doing your job search. You picked a group that I think has a very healthy attitude about work and work-life balance and all those things. I think some groups are like, we're going 150 miles an hour at all times, keep up if you can. And, it's definitely one of those things where, I think the group ethos and the group, kind of philosophy is very important. Do you have any specific kind of like a board of managers or a group who will look at people's work patterns and kind of keep an eye on that?
Yeah, I think it's part of the philosophy of the group you're kind of lucky. It's a little bit like a marriage. You really like this other person, you really like this other group, but you don't quite know how it's going to end up a few years down the line. I think that's a good analogy right there. And so I'm fortunate enough to be a member of a group that I joined because it was fully democratic and very fair, and had been from day one. And so I knew that the needs of the individuals of the group would not be overlooked. And so that was probably my primary factor in thinking about, and also where I wanted to live, but factor as far as a group is concerned. And so over time, and we do have a managing board in our group that I've been a part of in the past that tried to balance some of this in terms of partners who would come on and want to work a very high number of shifts.
And you're kind of
and we all kind of know about what that level is for us. And then this person wants to work a couple of more. or 3 or 4 more per month because they, and the strategy there to handle was basically, hey, listen, you can work these shifts, but we're going to be listening for any signs of you getting burned out, for lack of better terms. When you get
complaints, behavior,
complaints, when you get feedback from staff that you're not your normal self, you're not acting right, you're maybe not making the best decisions in certain circumstances, we're going to step in and say you need to back off. And just as long as you know that, and being a democratic group, of course, it's a little bit painful to go through those kind of conversations, but it's the right thing for not only an individual, but if we really like that individual, we want them to be around for a long time in our group. We don't want to continue hiring more and more people, so it overall is better served for the individual and for the group.
Yeah, another ER physician, not in your group, but elsewhere, had told me one time, he's like, yeah, I think you got about 50,000 patients in you, and you can see them all in 10 years, or you can stretch it out for, 15 or 20 years. And it's because it's just, I think it's the volume of patients, I think, can be, and the acuity, clearly. So, all right. So I think for you and for emergency physicians in general, I think the other question I had is, not only is burnout a giant problem, and I just saw a statistic during COVID, I think the average burnout rate for physicians is now about 60% across the board. I'm sure for ER, it's even higher because typically you guys are probably 10 to 20% above. So it might be 70 or 80% at this point. So I think clearly burnout is a problem, but when you start looking at the psychological effects of what we do, the emotional effects, I think especially for the intensity, traumatic, and life or death situation that you all are in on a daily basis. I mean, I've got to think PTSD is a real thing. And I don't know if you've developed mechanisms or policies in your group to look at that, or if that's something you get help from the hospital with.
I think that we do encounter a lot of things in our day-to-day job that leads to burnout at higher rates than other specialties would probably entail. And that includes not only super sick patients that need immediate care, which is, if you don't like that aspect of medicine, you shouldn't be going into my field. So I think a lot of us kind of like that fundamentally. But the other factor that really probably is even more important in that regard is the unpredictability of patient volume. That's just something you can't plan for. And so on days that are extremely busy, where you're working at maximum capacity, and then
more
other sick patients who come in to demand your needs, that's very tough, very, very tough to deal with. And you just have to take a deep breath on a regular basis during your shift and going, I can only work as hard as I can work. And I'm going to do the best I can do. And that's about all I can do. And that's been pretty good for most of my career. And so just fall back with the confidence that the best I can do is the best I can do. And that's it. And there are other factors that we may have.
Right. And then you're constantly prioritizing and triaging, in yourself, your time, the resources in the emergency department, the resources in the hospital. I mean, it's it's like a computer program or a big jigsaw puzzle that I'm sure you've well figured out at this point. So
I think as far as the personal impact of very sick and traumatic cases, especially ones that include death and conversations of families who have had family members who have died. When those really strike you in a difficult tone, I think that the fallback mechanism for a lot of us is just to talk about it. And for me personally, and probably for a lot of my colleagues, the best people to talk about are your fellow emergency medicine colleagues, and not at work. If it's something really hits you strongly, then why don't you schedule a coffee or a drink with that friend and go out and talk things through. And I don't know that that's a specific thing that I learned at any stage of my career or advice, but it's just a common sense thing that has certainly helped me at those times when those types of experiences have come about that have really helped me. And say, guess what? You're not the only person who's gone through something like this. Guess what? It wasn't your fault. Guess what? It's probably going to happen again. And so, all those things that help you feel more human as you're going through these experiences that are really, really helpful in terms of dealing with them too.
Yeah, and I think, in general, just by the way, if you want to watch this video, go to Facebook, Jeff Moody, MD on Facebook. You can watch this. You can find it on YouTube. You can go to my website, look at the book, The Doctor's Burned Out, A Physician's Guide to Recovery. So just get the help you need. I'm here with Kevin Crumpton, ER physician masterclass here in Colorado Springs, and very happy to have him on the show today. Question I had about, and I think we were just talking about how basically we are, I think by nature, the process we go through, it's a very competitive process. And I kind of like, I tell my patients, I'm like, when I have a kidney stone or something like that, I'm like, if I can't get the kidney stone out, usually there's some foot stomping and swearing by me because I like to win. Like I like them to do the job that I am trained to do and get them done. But sometimes there are like patient factors, other factors that, you can't control. And that's why, take a breath, and over the course of your career, you're like, a certain percentage of these aren't going to go exactly the way we want, and we'll do our best every time. But, I tell my patients, I try to be stubborn, but not stupid. I'm like, we're going to do everything we can, but we're not going to do something that's going to be detrimental or out of the usual protocol. So,
yeah, I think all of these little unpredictable things that happen in your career, despite your best efforts, are tough to deal with. They're tough. You don't need another negative block in the road to bring you down when you're trying your best to do a good job in your career. And I had the privilege of being chairman of peer review for my group before it became a whole hospital thing. So we just had emergency medicine peer review. And when you have a practice that sees 80,000 patients a year at 2 hospitals, there are going to be some cases that go sideways. And so invariably, when there'd be a letter I'd have to send to one of my colleagues about a case, it would just be, met with such dismay and sadness. And I said, look, how many patients do you see a year? Yeah. I said, 2,000, maybe 2,500. I said, is this the only mistake, that's of significance that's been pointed out to you so far? I said, this is a human endeavor. This is a human enterprise. And it's impossible to practice it without some degree of error, especially when you're adding all of those levels of complexity of busyness, sickness, of patients, unpredictability. Those things are what's going to make you have some mistakes here and there. And so do your best to understand that that's also part of the process, and don't let it pull you sideways to think that that's always going to make you feel like that.
Right. And I think that's also the pressure. So I think some of the pressure we put on ourselves is also one of the things that feeds burnout. Is like we're demanded to be perfect in undergrad and in medical school and in residency, and then you get out and then you're just like, it can't be that way. And clearly, from a patient standpoint, we want every patient to have the best possible outcome, but sometimes there are not good outcomes. And I kind of say, like, every day is a school day. It's like, I always kind of figure if I'm not learning something every day, then I wasn't trying hard enough, to learn.
I think that I agree with that. I think that's true.
What do you feel like is there a room or a role for either system-based or hospital-based kind of interventions for burnout, for either, like, you are not employees of the hospital, correct? Correct. For physicians who are not employed, or for physicians who are employed, or do you even feel like there are national kind of roles or strategies that should be employed, I guess?
I think I don't have as much knowledge of what's available from a national point of view through my college. I'm sure if I went on the webpage and was feeling particularly burned out and I typed that in, I could probably roll to some references which could help me. It would make a lot of sense to have it be a more proactive thing. For instance, as a matter of fact, Jeff, I think this could probably incorporate it into most physicians' recertification process, which for my field is becoming an every year thing now.
Yeah, the MLC,
rather than every 10-year thing. And so it would be very easy to insert into that a physician wellness track that you really needed to read 2 articles about summary about where you are and what you can do if you're feeling that way. That would not be very hard to implement and probably could help a lot of people out. That has not happened in my field yet.
And that has not happened in our field either. It's always about medical knowledge, a little bit about, learning, continuing learning over time. We do some case reviews, those types of things for our MOC. And then we do have a test every 10 years, but yeah, not a lot about kind of wellness yet. I think as you and I and our kind of generation of physicians get into those leadership positions, I think that's when you're going to start to see some of those changes. Because I think just really probably the last 5 to 10 years is when burnout has become more of a known phenomenon. And obviously right now it's just an acute, exacerbation with the pandemic.
Oh yeah. Oh, definitely.
Do you feel like you've seen more in your colleagues in the last 6
Yes,
months?
I have. And we had this bizarre thing that happened in the beginning of COVID where nobody came to the emergency department.
Oh yeah. Well, our office is looking at the parking lot for the emergency department, and like we'd be like, we'd look over, there's like 2 cars in the parking lot, like empty, for weeks at a time. It seemed.
So we went, our volumes were off 65%, 70% for a while. And we're going, hang on a second, where are all of the heart attacks and the kidney stones and the MIs? And where's all that stuff? That has nothing to do with COVID. And that's kind of bread and butter stuff. And people.
And also you feel like that those things are still happening, but I'm like, where are the patients? Are they just actually passing away at home? It's like, good heavens. Like
there are initial studies to show that that's the case, that the mortality of all those things that we treated and did well with before stayed at home and died during this period. There'll be more data coming out about that, but there's.
Well, I'm sure you're familiar with that concept of excess death. And there was, I think in Colorado, 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 excess deaths over the historical averages in those time periods. And you're like, those are people who should have and could have come to the hospital. And,
Exactly.
and I think that the other thing, people were so fearful that they would get something in the emergency department. Like, you're not going to get anything except you're going to be front row. You're going to be first because there's nobody here.
There's been documented suicide that has already happened from a practitioner.
Yep.
In emergency medicine. It's been pretty well documented. And the amount of burnout it's easy, very, very easy to understand in these times, and especially in the first several months when the volume started picking back up and there was so much that was unknown, and that translated to a lot of extra fear. It's like the unknown part of it as much as anything. Like, and how is it getting transmitted to me?
Did you ever feel like you had inadequate PPE or anything like that? Were you ever like that? To me, I was like, God, I could go to work and get something that could kill me and my family. That was like my fear in the first month.
In the very beginning, for a very short amount of time, there was a struggle to make sure that everyone had what they needed.
Yeah.
And that was scary. I mean, and now it's impressive the amount of comfort that's come back around with being able to deal with this. Granted, we were never so unfortunate in Colorado to have what New York City had, where, I mean, that's
peaks in death.
Amazing to think about. But at the same time, there's a lot of stress involved with making sure that you keep yourself healthy and not transmit this to your family and so forth. And so I think we all got comfortable with a method and a confidence to be able to do that, and then it was better. But all the uncertainty that surrounded this, and all of the increased amount of time that it takes and effort it takes to care for someone who either has COVID or very well may have it, is difficult, with the full PPE, the cleaning down before and after, the making sure that you're making yourself appropriate, that you're not transmitting this to anybody else.
Right.
That's a stress, and that we dealt with that. We still are dealing with that kind of head on as best we can.
And the fascinating thing to me is like now, like, we wear masks all day, every day, seeing patients. The patients are wearing masks. Everyone's getting temperature checks. I probably get my temperature taken 5 or 10 times a day between the various facilities I'm going between. And, now it's kind of like, I actually feel now that realistically, because now that everyone's wearing masks, I feel much better. So I'm like, you know what? Before, I felt like when I was wearing a mask, I was protecting my patients from me being kind of like the carrier, because I see lots of different people and somebody gave it to me. I was trying not to give it to somebody else, especially my older patients, which in urology, we obviously see tons of older patients. But, it was fascinating that when we weren't wearing masks initially, and now that we are, I feel much better, just because I think that's such a better overall protective mechanism for people. That's just my personal opinion.
I think you're right, and I think the data are going to bear that out, Jeff. I think that that initial report that came out that said that was basically to the effect of if you wear a mask, you're not going to be fully protected. I think, and then people took that to mean that it didn't provide any level.
It didn't matter at all, yeah.
Whatsoever,
no.
And then it didn't matter at all, right? Those were the kind of the three levels. And in fact, everyone wearing masks appropriately now, I think, has made a huge impact in minimizing the amount of transmission that's happened, even just simple masks.
Yeah, any kind of mask, like even the bandana, although some of the materials are supposedly not as good, but it was fascinating. I think I saw a statistic like 85% of people now wear masks on a regular basis when they're out and about. And I'm like, you know what? That's pretty amazing. That's a big behavior change for the U.S., especially since we're a lot of really stubborn, independent people. That still means though, like 30 or 40 million people are not wearing masks on a regular basis.
I think that the corollary of this for a lot of the Asian countries, particularly Japan and South Korea, are that it's very culturally acceptable on a regular basis to wear a mask. But I think that's impacted their extremely low death rates in both of their countries. I think that's not an accident. I think that's in part due to that mask issue.
Well, and they talk about viral load. So I think if everyone's not wearing a mask, the viral load you get is much higher. So I think the masks, like you said, may not give you perfect protection, but it's going to be something that is like will reduce the degree of severity of illness you get if you get it. I feel like. So.
Agreed.
Oh, Kevin, I want to be respectful of your time. Thank you very, very, very much. I really appreciate it. Kevin Crumpton, ER physician, great guy, super smart guy, has dealt with burnout on many levels, personally, group-wise, hospital-wise, and I think been very effective. We're so glad for your input. I'm so glad for you taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it. Remember, Burnout Breakthroughs occurs on a regular basis on the live stream. They're all memorialized on Facebook and on YouTube. Please get on those, get on my email list, go to jeffmoody.com, get the resources there, sign up for my emails, get my book, The Doctor's Burned Out. Ta-da! Available now, available on Amazon. I'm like a bad rash. You can't get rid of me. So very much appreciated, Kevin. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome. Thank you, Jeff.
And everybody remember, burnout recovery is for you.